Welcome back to my channel. Hello. Do I seem like a stranger? I feel like I do. I have not filmed a video in a while. My life has been a little bit hectic in the last month, and one big thing, as you can see, I have a box over here right now. I am packing, I am moving. I wanted to do my November wrap up. I feel like I barely read in November. I definitely read a decent amount of books. For some people it would be a good amount, but I read a lot of romance, a lot of contemporary romance because of how busy I've been. It's kind of hard to read fantasy when you're busy because fantasy takes a little more brain power than like a contemporary romance. So let's see, I read 5 books in November. I only read, I think, 1 book that was on my TBR for November. I mainly read on my Kindle as well. Like, my Kindle got some love this month. So the first book that I read this month was Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, and this is a second chance romance. This is about a wedding planner who has commitment issues and a grumpy florist. So we have Emma and we have Elliot. This was very different, but whenever we were in the past timeline, we would get it in Elliot's point of view, but the present was always in Emma's point of view. Basically, the both of them are in the wedding planning industry because he's a florist and she is a wedding planner. So they at some point kind of come together and work on a lot of weddings together. They build a little bit of a relationship, and because of her commitment issues and him falling really hard for her, it just breaks them apart and they don't talk for years. But then Emma gets hired for a really big wedding and Elliot has already been hired on as a florist, so they basically have to work together. I gave this book a 3-star rating. The reason I rated this 3 stars is because it wasn't bad. I liked it. It was something that I felt was an easy read and it was fun. I enjoyed mostly like the wedding planning aspect of it. My mom was in the wedding planning industry, so I got to experience it a lot of the time. I felt like it was very realistic to what a small business wedding planner is like and how they experience things. Anytime we were in the past, their relationship was pretty much physical. I didn't really feel their emotional connection, and for majority of the book they didn't even talk. That was another big thing. And then like all of a sudden at the end, it's just like boom, they suddenly talk to each other and they're like completely over everything that happened in the past. I always understand that it's fiction, but it just felt really weird. So next I read Powerless by Elsie and I also gave this book 3 stars. And I'm really sad to say that because I had high hopes for it because I love childhood friends to lovers. I think what ruined the book for me a little bit was once the two of them got together, they talked a lot about their sex lives, and whatever, to each their own, but it just felt like all they talked about was sex, and he would make certain sexual comments, and like it was almost like they couldn't have a serious conversation without like a sex joke being brought up or something to do with sex being brought up. I already knew going into the Chestnut Spring series there's spice in these books. There's at least like 6 spice scenes. There's just something that just rubbed me the wrong way, and I just felt a little bit lost with the whole childhood connection that they had. Anytime we got any glimpses or feelings of the childhood moments between the both of them, I was swooning over it, but I just felt like I didn't get enough of that. So Sloane is a cousin of this entire Eaton family. She meets Jasper, who is basically, he's not like an adopted brother, but he is like an honorary brother in their family. They took him in at a young age, so he was almost like a brother to them. At the beginning of the book, Sloane is actually engaged to be married, and it's more of like an arranged marriage. I just thought this one was going to end up being my favorite because of the childhood friends to lovers, but it ended up not being my favorite. Okay, so next is the only physical book that I have for this month, and I actually didn't even read it physically. My husband was so annoyed with me when he found me reading this book on my Kindle because I rushed the store to buy this the day it came out, and that is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This is the second book in the Empyrean series, which is the Fourth Wing series. I gave Iron Flame a 4.25. I had to be specific. This follows Violet's second year at the war college, and this focuses a lot on training and preparing for war. The reason that I didn't give this a 4.5, and I had to be very specific, was because I felt like Xaden and Violet's conflict that they have with each other and their communication issues just felt a little bit repetitive. Of course, sometimes couples go through things like that, and that's fine, but it felt like they would get over a hurdle and Violet would just like bring the problem back up later on. Like, I don't know, every time you think that everything's fine, it felt like Violet would constantly need to bring up this issue of communication. They both had their own issues, but the arguments felt very repetitive for me. A lot of people have mentioned that this one has a lot of info dumping, And it does, but it wasn't anything that like annoyed me personally because I was prepared for it. I realized in the first book that there wasn't a lot of info dumping, and that is very typical for a fantasy. You get a lot of information in the first book, but we didn't really get that in the first one. So I knew that going into this one, we were gonna get a ton of information. We were gonna get slower moments as well, because when you have a really exciting first book, it's hard to follow that. I feel like it depends how it's done. I haven't had an issue in majority of fantasy books that I've read where I'm annoyed with information dumping. If you're someone who's not a big fantasy reader, you may not enjoy this one because this is where it feels a little more fantasy. I think it definitely needs a lot more development for a fantasy, but some people who are romance readers really got into fantasy by reading this series, so I don't know. But once you get into Iron Flame, I think it kind of changes. Next, I read Mile High by Liz Tomforde. This is on Kindle Unlimited, and this is a book that is about Stevie. She's a flight attendant for Chicago's NHL team, and that's where she meets Xanders, who is the captain of the Chicago NHL team. And he kind of puts on this little front like he's a bad boy, but he kind of does it for the media. The two of them are attracted to each other. They keep bumping into one another. They have this very playful banter. So because they keep bumping into each other, she gets to know him a little bit better and see that he's not really the guy that he pretends to be for the cameras. And let me just tell you guys, I loved this book. I did not expect to like this book at all. I read Mile High specifically to read The Right Move because I heard things about The Right Move. A lot of people love the main male character in that book, but I love Mile High so much. Such a good contemporary romance. It was so fun. The banter was amazing. The chemistry between these two characters was just chef's kiss. Like, I couldn't get over it. I ate this book up. Like, to be honest, this was probably my favorite book for the month. I've mentioned a ton of times I have a really hard time rating contemporary romances very highly, and this one just did it for me. I just feel like although there was a decent amount of spice in this book, it wasn't enough to ruin the connection for me. It wasn't enough to ruin the story. It didn't overpower the story. It didn't overpower the couple. It was just, oh my gosh, this book was just so good. The two of them had this one thing that they always said to each other that got me every single time. I originally gave this book a 4.25, but I think I'm gonna give it a 4.5 because it was just too good for me not to give it a 4.5. I love it. It's probably gonna become a comfort book for me, and I will probably go back and read this at some point. Because I love Mile High so much, I immediately went into The Right Move by Liz Tomforde, which is the second book in this series. This is the Windy City series, which I didn't mention before. So this is all about different professional athletes and their romance stories. This one is about Stevie from the first book, her brother Ryan Shea. So he is an NBA player. He plays for the Chicago NBA team. This is also about Indy, who is Stevie's best friend that you get to meet in the first book. Indy is also a flight attendant for Chicago's NHL team. Indy gets out of a really bad relationship and she needs somewhere to stay, and Stevie proposes that she stays with Ryan, her brother, because he has a spare room. While she's staying there, Ryan ends up needing a fake girlfriend at some point to kind of help his image with his general manager. His general manager wants to see him be a little more personable and kind of be more than just an NBA player and someone that cares about things other than just basketball. So he decides he needs a fake girlfriend, and Indy is that girl. I read Mile High because I wanted to read this book, and I ended up enjoying Mile High a lot better. It took me a little while to get through this one. I didn't feel the chemistry as much as I would have wanted to. It was kind of there, but I'm not gonna lie, it felt very physical, especially when you read Mile High and Indy meets Ryan for the first time. She already kind of sexualizes him and immediately talks about how hot he is. It's just something she's always mentioning throughout the book. Yes, I do think Ryan really opened up to Indy and Indy really opened up to Ryan, but they've just felt very physical. I just really felt like the physical aspect overpowered it a little for me. Also, like, the two of them really frustrated me a lot of the time. It's one of those like communication things again. It just felt like they were going in circles a lot of the time, and it just really frustrated me a lot. I can understand why a lot of people love Ryan Shea because he's very attentive, and you can tell like he listens to what Indy says and he will remember. And so I gave The Right Move a 3.5. I think it deserves the 0.5 because it wasn't bad, and it was definitely better than some other 3-star books that I have read. But it just, for me, it wasn't that great. And I think that's fine. I will continue to read the series. My biggest beef with this series that I have is that Rio, if you've read this book, you know who I'm talking about. He's yet to have a book. I'd really like to know why Rio doesn't have a book. I will not be happy until he has one. Those are all the books that I read in the month of November. I'm hoping December is going to be a lot better. Let me know if you've read any of these books and how you feel about them, what you rated them, or if any of these books are on your TBR as well. If you like this video, please do not forget to give it a like. If you are not subscribed, do not forget to subscribe. And I am hoping to get back to my consistent weekly posting. I will see you guys in the next video.